Welcome to the Great Basin Weekly Fuels Briefing for Thursday, July 9th. I'm Gina Palma. Looking at the last 7 days for precipitation, we have had precipitation mainly across the north, but also in parts of southern Utah, eastern Utah, and the Arizona Strip. Much of this was due to thunderstorms, so that explains the very spotty nature of the precipitation, with the exception of the Salmon Chalice, which did have a little bit more widespread precipitation, and really all of this was above normal for the time of year because this is a very dry time of year for the Great Basin. But you can see many areas that have had no precipitation over the last week across much of the southern and western areas of the basin and even into parts of southern Idaho. Looking at the drought conditions, currently our long-term drought here on the right shows still widespread severe to extreme drought across the region and even an area of exceptional drought still over northeast Nevada into southern Idaho. Even areas over central Idaho and into western and southern Nevada that have not been in drought really much of the winter. The drought has continued to intensify and we're now seeing moderate drought. Looking at the evaporative demand drought index over the last month here on the left, you can see with the dry conditions, hot temperatures, we have seen the drought intensify in more of the short term over the Arizona Strip, southern and eastern Utah, and even up into central Utah, and even into western Nevada. So this is not really representative in the long-term drought, but these areas are seeing a very drying conditions recently. Now looking at the days since rainfall, here on the left are the days since precipitation of any amount. And you can see most areas have had precipitation in the last week or so, but there are still some spots over western and southern Nevada and even the Arizona Strip and southwest and western Utah that have not seen any precipitation in over a month. Now looking at the days since wetting rains over 1/10 of an inch, you can see here on the right, even in areas that we have seen some recent precipitation, we really haven't seen significant amounts, and wetting rains we haven't seen in a lot of areas in over 1 to 2 months. The main exceptions will be over the northern third of the Great Basin, which did see the cold front over a week ago bring more significant precipitation. Looking at our fire danger, our ERC percentiles, you'll notice this map looks different than maybe what you saw yesterday or last week. We have updated our colors and percentiles, so they're a little bit closer to what we saw last year with respect to the range. But looking at where we are currently, these areas across southern and eastern Nevada and all of Utah are above the 80th or 90th percentile, and we are seeing areas in the south now perk above the 97th percentile. Up in the north, even where we saw the colder temperatures and even high elevation snowfall and recent wetting rains from the cold front over 7 days ago, these areas have rebounded fairly quickly and are above the 80th percentile. Even areas in the central Idaho mountains, which saw the most widespread wetting rain and snowfall, where they saw rainfall amounts over 1 to 2 inches in many areas, those areas have already bounced back to above the 70th percentile. And you can see from the trends in the circles, really we are expecting heat this weekend into next week with very dry conditions, so we will see all areas have significant increases in fire danger. Looking at what we have currently in effect for the Great Basin, we still have a fuel and fire behavior advisory in effect for eastern Nevada and much of Utah and into the Arizona Strip. This will be updated on Friday, and so we will be including the Manti-La Salle in this advisory, so expect that update later this week. And this advisory is, again, for persistent drought that we have ongoing and intensifying, record low live and dead fuel moistures, fine fuels that are cured and in some areas continuous. We are seeing also reports of shrub and tree mortality, creating extreme fire behavior, which has been observed and continues across this region. And we're also seeing a very low fuel moistures in the juniper, and those fuels really haven't been taking on moisture like they normally would over the last couple of months. So we're seeing a significant fire growth, even from juniper to juniper in areas that don't have significant ground fuels. And you can access this from our Great Basin Coordination Center website. Now looking at the current fire activity across the Great Basin is still at PL4. Nick is also at PL4. You can see for the Great Basin, we have several large and team fires across the region, mainly in Utah, also the Grapevine in southeast Nevada, and then the Claremont up near Boise, that will also be mobilizing a team. We still have the Kinky Creek fire, but also initial attack is increasing across the region, and we typically see light to moderate initial attack every day. Many of these fires, especially across the northern half of the region, also down south, have been increasing to between 50 and 300 acres, and many areas over 1,000 acres. So we are still seeing increased initial attack along with increased growth on many of our fires that we are seeing in addition to our team fires. We also have the Dutch Flat Fire over here in northwest Nevada. That was a large fire, but that has recently been contained. Now looking at specific fire danger starting in the north across Idaho and Wyoming. Starting in central Idaho, which is where our fire danger is the lowest, fire danger did decrease significantly with the cold front that moved through about 10 days ago, bringing significant moisture and cold temperatures and even high elevation snowfall. However, ERCs have been rebounding rapidly and are now almost at the 70th percentile, and over the next 7 days will rapidly be increasing to almost the 90th percentile. In areas further south that either saw less precipitation or are in lower elevations, ERCs have already rebounded to above the 80th percentile. And in southwest Idaho, you can see again these rapidly rising ERCs and will likely be above the 90th percentile within the next few days. And even over western Wyoming, which is more high elevation, we will see those ERCs hitting almost records or even above records for the time of year. So when the Kinky Creek fire started before the moisture, we will likely see those conditions emerge here in a similar fashion in the next few days and even exceed that as we go into the next week. Looking at some of the fire activity and live and dead fuel moisture across Idaho, again, we have the Claremont and Kinky Creek. So Claremont started and it quickly grew to over 6,000 acres northeast of Boise. We are seeing much higher than average fine fuel loading in southern Idaho, and also sagebrush well below normal and dropping. Areas further east in Twin Falls, we are seeing fuel moisture again at record lows for the time of year, fully cured cheatgrass and the perennials curing to above 5,500 feet, and initial attack is increasing with fires growing to size across southern Idaho. And again, in western Wyoming, where the Kinky Creek fire was prior to the moisture, we'll see that fire potential rebound to that similar condition within the next few days and even exceed that. Areas of the Payette and Salmon Chalice, again, did receive moisture about 10 days ago, but we are seeing rapid drying in these areas. Looking at now down in Nevada for our ERCs. ERCs in the north and west are on the lower side, at least with respect to other areas, but still we're seeing ERCs between the 70th and 90th percentile, and all those areas will be rising. As you can see from some of these graphs, we will likely be hitting the 90th percentile. There are some drops, as you're noticing, in some of the forecast ERCs, and that's due to some potential upcoming moisture next week associated with the monsoon. But I wouldn't put too much faith in this quite yet. We'll see where that moisture actually moves, but we will at least see some moisture coming into the basin. Areas over southern Nevada and eastern Nevada, we have obviously seen more critical conditions, less rainfall recently, so those ERCs are higher and will likely peak above the 97th percentile before potentially dropping down. And then up across the north, ERCs still rapidly rising and will likely be above the 90th percentile in the next few days and could even potentially get close to that 97th percentile. So we are expecting very critical conditions. Now looking at our fire activity and some live dead fuel moisture across Nevada. So again, we had Dutch Flat and Grapevine were the two large fires recently across the basin. And starting up near Dutch Flat, that fire grew over 15,000 acres quickly, mostly in the grass and brush, and was fully consuming the brush. And then down south in the Ely area, we saw the Grapevine and Cane Springs fires recently, which were over 17,000 acres, and a team mobilization on the Grapevine fires. Fires are burning in grass, timber litter, understory, and PJ, with fuel moisture lower than they've ever seen and rapid spread rates with little wind. So we'll continue to see these conditions until we start to get some moisture, hopefully next week. And then up in northern Nevada, so across northeast Nevada and the Elko area, we are definitely seeing initial attack increasing and seeing starts from recent lightning. We also did see some new fine fuel loading reports of around 600 pounds per acre, which is lower than average. Now moving down to Utah and the Arizona Strip for looking at fire danger. ERCs are above the 97th percentile in the south and above the 90th percentile in the north, and we'll see all areas rapidly rising over the next week. We will see where the moisture next week targets. It might be further west, but if it does move further east into Utah, we will see some of these ERCs start to trend down. But again, before then, we will see ERCs getting more critical. And then looking at some of the 100 and 1,000-hour juniper and sagebrush fuel moisture across Utah and the Arizona Strip. So for juniper, again, you're seeing those trends fairly flat with the fuel moisture and very low. So again, haven't really been taking on moisture like they would have this year. And then looking in the Fish Lake with 1,000 hours, they did have a slight uptick with the recent moisture we saw about a week ago and some cooler temperatures, but they will be trending downward and will likely get to historic lows here in the coming week. Then moving up into central Utah, looking at sagebrush. Although sagebrush is technically near to even above normal in some areas over the northern half of the region, looking at the actual values, you're seeing fuel moisture below 80%, which is critical for fuel moisture and fire behavior. And then up north in the Uinta-Wasatch, 100-hour fuel moistures are still they're below normal, but not quite at record lows. But you can see how rapidly they will be decreasing and could get to record lows here within the next week. Looking at fire activity and live and dead fuel moisture across Utah and the Arizona Strip, you can see our slew of team fires, large fires across Utah. These fires have been exhibiting extreme fire behavior, with the Cottonwood fire quickly growing to over 60,000 acres in the first 2 days and currently over 96,000 acres. We have the Babylon fire in southeast Utah growing to over 70,000 acres and currently now actually over about 100,000 acres. So significant growth still on all of these fires that continue to burn in tall grass, timber litter, understory, and brush. And really every fire we are getting are growing to over 40 acres. We also have the Wild Goose fire, which is north of Cottonwood, which is also over 12,000 acres. Further south in Color Country, we are seeing some reports of grass samples showing below average fine fuel loading, but you can see from the pictures there's still plenty of grass to support rapid fire spread and with the continued dry fuels. And then in the Arizona Strip, record low fuel moisture with the juniper, we are seeing, and also very record low dead fuel moisture as well, and also some die off in these areas, which is contributing to the extreme fire behavior. Now looking at our critical fuel status map, which again is used for the National Weather Service when determining when to issue red flag warnings. You can see really very little change from last week to this week. Most areas have already been critical across the Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip, and even southern Idaho. But where we saw the recent moisture, we did see the critical status drop a bit, but that is drying out, and you can see that in western Wyoming and in southwest Idaho, where we have seen some areas become more critical or approaching critical, and even in the higher elevations of the Uinta Mountains. So that concludes our Great Basin Weekly Fuels Briefing. Check back next week for the latest updates.